There we are.
All right. All right. So this is Sunday, September 28th, Southern Oregon Progressive Podcast. And I am joined. I'm Betsy Cunningham, and I am joined by Zach Whitworth and John Hunter. And if you want to introduce more about yourselves, you can do that. Um, so, other than Community Rights Oregon or
Yes,
Community Rights Douglas County.
yes, yes. I'm with Community Rights Douglas County and with the Oregon Community Rights Network, the statewide group.
And I'm Zach. I'm a graduate student in the history department at the University of Oregon, born and raised in good old Roseburg. I'm affiliated with the Institute for Social Ecology in Vermont, and have been involved with Community Rights Douglas County this year. Happy to be here.
All right, so yesterday we were involved with just doing that community, what it call I can end up calling what the um community commons conversation. And we talked, had some um folks from Uncle Watersheds. And I don't, and Francis is just, I guess, billed as an environmentalist who talked about the parks. Um, Zach talked about the kind of structure of government or local, municipalities and that kind of thing, as well as a bit about the turf wars and their impact on the commons, aka the soccer fields at Fir Grove. And I did this stuff on housing and homelessness. Um, and did I miss anything? Oh, and the fact that we can do something about it if we want, which I think was a big premise of.
Mhm.
So, any takes on what we learned?
Uh, I I uh I would say that the major takeaways that I had was uh, that there are clearly needs for the maintenance of public lands as public. And particularly in the presentation that Francis gave, that had especially to do with clear cutting of county parks, uh, the the very clear consequence of the ecological negligence of county officials, the lack of discussion with local residents can very easily spell not just intensification of what gets called climate change, but real physical danger to the residents of our community. Uh, I believe Francis brought up the issue of landslides
Right.
that were occurring during the last major rainstorm in Douglas County, that occurred really as a result of hillsides being clear cut without warning. That inattention to how trees function to prevent ecological devastation of a community, I think is it doesn't it's not just that it needs to be curtailed, but that it seemed to me that it requires real democratic institutions so that people who are in circumstances, our neighbors, who are placed in danger by those kinds of clear cuts, by the destruction of public lands and public parks and such. They need to not just have a say at the table, but be part of the decision making in order to prevent those kinds of um, ecological destruction from taking place at all.
Yeah, I I, I was really part of that whole, I got involved with that whole discussion there with Brent Nichols. Actually, it was like the second time around because we went around with them when they were discussing logging it, and then try to get them, complain about that, and then they voted to log it. And I actually thought they were going to log it, but the market was bad, and they put it off. And then next thing I know, well, this couple Ben and Shannon bought this uh, a, a property right down the hill from Brent Nichols, and nobody told him anything about it. And Ben was walking around checking out his property line and saw the timber, about uh, there the timber, you know, at the property, and proposed timber cut. So they got all worked up and contacted the county, and they got hold of Francis and ended up getting hold of me. And what they actually did, they hired a soils engineer to come out and check the soil out. And he came out with a report that was saying that, I mean, he predicted that if that soil was unstable enough, that if that was clear a cut, there was a high chance of a landslide. And they took that to the county commissioners, their report, and they came up with two alternatives. One was to selectively log Brent Nichols, or to leave 100-foot a buffer between the property lines and the unit. The commissioners dismiss the soils report and declined to do either one of the proposals. They said they couldn't afford to. It would cost them too much money. So, and so like a year after they log it, the first heavy rain, they have a landslide. And Ben and Shannon were very, very unlucky that the damage wasn't, a whole lot worse. All that timber sold for about $1 million. The deal the county got out of it, they got like $600,000 out of it because they had to share it with the Kiwanis and this Roseburg School District. And 600,000 when you got a yearly budget of, what is it, over 200 million, that's not a lot of money. And public relations alone was, if you really cared about the public and your image, you would have given them that 100-foot buffer. I mean, they only made 600,000. The way it was. I doubt if they would have lost 100,000 more if they hadn't done that. I don't think that much. So yeah, you talk about like, I mean, they dismissed everybody's concern just because they wanted as much money as they could possibly get.
Clearly,
You're on.
as I spoke in my in
You
my
what?
as I said in my own portion of the presentations yesterday, there clearly is a uh, a prioritization, at least on the part of county officials, city officials in places like Roseburg. There is a governing mentality that is geared entirely toward profit and seeing what we call the commons, public spaces, not just that we share, but that we depend upon, and we depend upon the conservation of, broadly speaking, seeing those as profitable opportunities and treating them as such, that being the governing mentality of our local officials. That contradicts the possibility for life. We need those kinds of spaces, commons, in order to sustain ourselves. And that is not just in the form of, not just agriculture sustaining ourselves, but having a stable, relatively stable, healthy ecosystem that doesn't lead to our destruction. It occurred to me in writing my notes for yesterday's presentation and reflecting on it afterward that our approach to land use in Douglas County and beyond Douglas County, our approach to land use, so long as it is dictated by a mentality of grow or die, profit or crumble. That kind of attitude, that kind of approach to land use will render our communities unlivable. To the degree that they're not already pretty unlivable. And we're just trying to survive in a hellscape. Uh, I think it necessitates a real reconsideration of what kind of government we should have in communities like ours, but also considering that when we're talking about profit, generating wealth, money, uh, that is a question of economy. I think it also is going to have to entail us asking serious questions about what kind of economy we want to have in Douglas County, in the cities of Douglas County, and on the whole. Do we want an economy, a community that is centered on extraction, and extraction to the point of destroying our very means of life, our ability to even live in cities like Sutherland, Roseburg, Winston, etc., much in the rural areas of Douglas County beyond that? Are we really going to say we're going to extract to profit to the ends that will destroy ourselves? I don't think that's a way to sustain any kind of community. And I don't think it bodes well for the future of the folks in Douglas County if that is going to continue to be the mode of operation.
Well, and you think about this, the what John said regarding this um clear cut, that it was too expensive to do either one of those mitigation options. So the quantification of potential loss of life, I mean, they're lucky that they weren't in the way of that mudslide, that all they suffered was property damage. But if I remember correctly, in what, the late 1990s, there was that mudslide out
Yeah,
there near IE,
yeah,
and people did die,
yes,
so, and that was a private logging, but it doesn't matter, right, whether it's
right,
private or public land. The concept of the commons is the problem with private land, is there's some sacrosanct, you can't touch my private property, and there's no real ongoing consideration and recognition that what you do on your property may affect us all, right? And often does. And so I think that, I think it is a different way we have to look at, that whole concept of, private property. And as I'm, talked about in regard to housing, you see this conflict all the time. And even talking about, I was a little bit later, I was going to talk about the urban campground being squashed, by the city council, because of the citizen uproar. But that was the kind of thing that people looking at just their self-interest and not really, and I don't blame the neighbors, I do blame the city, but not having the conversations with people to talk about this and say, wait a second, don't we have an obligation to, look out for each other, look out for the environment? I think we've ignored that on a community level for a long, long time.
Mhm.
Maybe never in my life.
Well, I mean, we know that the commissioner's motto is they got to run, they want to run everything like a business, which kind of contradicts everything that Zach is saying too. I mean,
Yeah.
their justification for logging all these parks is because they have to run the parks like a business. Therefore, they can't afford to have a forested park. It's they got to have their RV parks where they can generate income, and therefore they sacrifice the forested parks so they can have these RV parks.
Mhm.
And as I mean, when they logged Busen Park, I was pretty naive, and I started going to the commissioners meetings and the Parks Advisory Board meeting, and boy, was it a lesson real fast. I mean, it was it was like, you guys really don't give a shit. I mean, it's like, you guys don't give a shit. And they were proud of it. I mean, they made it known, and that was it. And it was just, it was a real shock. I mean, up to this time, I thought that maybe there was some enlightenment there in the county, but it didn't take me long to figure out that
They didn't want to be enlightened.
right.
John,
At least not by us.
No.
the word you used, the business, I think is interesting. I'd like to unravel that a little bit. But when a county commission, say, is understanding itself as a kind of business, or they are even professedly operating like a business, or just seeing themselves as a business, what that tells me is the operations then of county government uh, will fall prey to the same kinds of attitudes, socially speaking, not just economically, that for-profit businesses have. Those around you who have any kind of similarity to you are your competitors, not those who you're cooperating with. So I would think that if Douglas County is a business, if they're calling it a business or thinking about it like a business, that means that, say, our neighbors in Lane County or in Deschutes County or in Coos County or Josephine County are not neighbors who we are interested in cooperating with, interested in building mutualistic relations with, and having a uh, robust economy, a shared economy with. We're seeing them as enemies, competing for scarce resources. The scarce resources could be like what's coming to the counties from state coffers, or from the federal government, pools of so-called tax dollars that we receive for running certain services. We're standing in competition with our neighbors. And that's no way to live together. It's like to say that we're imagining ourselves living in a neighborhood in which every neighbor is peering across the fence, across the street, looking behind their backs to see if their nosy neighbor is looking to park their car in the wrong place, to steal something from our yard, and in return, we take initiative to take what we can at their expense. I think it's a nefarious mindset for a municipal government to have, for a county government to have, to think in terms of business and by extension profiteering as its sole mission. That's not conducive to a decent life for the people in the polities that they govern.
Yeah. And and it becomes even more insidious, not just, okay, there's so much of a budget, your population gets this, right? And it's distributed based on some more logical reason than a lot of grants at a federal level, particularly, they have pockets of money and every county doesn't get that money, right? There's competitive bids. So this further undermines that cooperation. And I see that a whole lot in housing, money for housing, like the state agency that gives grants for housing. I think it was 12, they just announced the, 12 apartment complexes. Not one of them is in Douglas County, right? So there's no money to address that. And that in those arenas, and that happens in a variety of other things, even law enforcement to some degree, they get some standardized funding, but then often there's other parts of it that, like a grant for traffic violations, seatbelts, whatever, those things come, around piecemeal. And I'm not even sure it's a business mentality, but it's like, well, and then the never ending stream of new trial ideas that are funded to agencies and governments that have limited fundings and an assumption that that local entity will be able to absorb the cost and continue the program. And most of them go away.
Mhm.
So, that competitiveness of capitalism is alive and well in nonprofit and government, right? For the reason of this kind of competing for this limited resource, that's artificial, right? If we can give tax breaks to the rich, we can certainly fund, people at a level that makes more sense and actually solves problems. But I used to read a lot about how capitalism worked, and employment stuff, and particularly when I was in the union, because in the 80s there was a lot of stuff, this, acceleration of all these employment management firms, right? For employees to control your labor, to how to cut the union, how to get the union or stop the unionization. And I looked at some of those, and some of the efficiency things of business made sense to me, that being in the nonprofit world, I see where maybe that isn't their strong suit. But the idea that the profit for government and nonprofits, if you will, is the service they provide. It's not the money they make, right? And that I think that's why it's so skewed. Just, I agree with you 100% that this mentality is, we're going to make money off of this public benefit. We're going to go sell it. And the example you use, right? The part, particularly the RV parks over on the coast, we talked about this before when we talked about them, that the cost is out of reach for a good number of people who live in Douglas County. I mean, if the Alice data of, the asset limited, that United Way did is true, probably half of the people in Douglas County, and probably more families than not, can't afford to camp here, because it's about making the money, not about making sure everybody in that's this resident of Douglas County has a place to park and, to camp on public lands.
Mhm.
Yeah, that is definitely true. I mean, their attitude seems to always have been, it's like, we're you know we are gonna take care of the wealthy, and we are gonna provide for them, and everybody else falls through the cracks. So, which which is very sad. But they actually, the county actually talks. They don't refer to the voters as citizens or voters. They refer to all of us as all of us as customers. That's how they look at us.
Yeah. And even the language in state government calls people consumers instead of clients and patients. And I
Yeah,
say, this is very disingenuous, but it is that language that is from that capitalist mentality. And
right.
that preaching for decades of we need to run government like a business.
Mhm.
That this propaganda has been going on for, at least since the 80s.
Yeah,
It's a
Well,
long time.
it's gone on since at least the Gilded Age.
Well, true.
And,
That's true.
and very famously, J.P. Morgan, uh, one of the richest men in history, we're accounting for inflation, I guess. He had more wealth than the entire federal government at one point. And when Grover Cleveland is struggling to keep his government afloat, he turns to J.P. Morgan to bail the government out. That is approaching government with a business mentality that that billionaires, that profiteers whose sole purpose on this planet that they've determined for themselves is to extract, exploit, and degrade the lives of everyone for their own personal gain, that they should be uh, not just at the helm of government, not even necessarily at the helm of government, but they should be the key support of the state. That the so-called private sector, but especially uh, nowadays multinational uh, corporations worth billions of dollars, have to be the backbone of uh, so-called civilization. That without them, civilization, so-called, would crumble. I think it's on the other side of the coin, another way of saying that what gets called civilization, a decent society, an enlightened society in which we live in greatest conditions possible, uh, is premised on the majority of the population living in squalor to enrich a few.
Speaking of which, squalor.
Speaking of squalor,
Um, this past week, the city did another sweep at Deer Creek Park. This was after, Monday's meeting. Um, and and letting people live in that, in what I see there. And everything was gone. There's some pictures on the city's website on the Facebook page, all the cleanup and the a tremendous amount of stuff there. And it looks like just a big old mess of trash and squalor. But when I was down in that vicinity this afternoon, somebody's telling me about somebody losing their medication that they need. and saying it was in a tent. And I said, well, how could it get thrown away if it was in a tent? And they said, well, they just saw it as, trash or garbage, right? And they call it a health hazard. And so this is, the kind of thing. Um, but you see the problem with people complaining about the way people are living. We don't want to do anything about it, right? Because, the citizens that live around where the city had proposed to buy a building to try to put in an urban campground, came up in arms and showed up at the city council meeting this past week. And the city, even the city councilors who were initially in support of it, decided to back away from their support. The only two city councilors voting for it were in, I believe it's Ward 3, which is across the I-5. I'm in 4 in downtown, and where that's located, I believe, was in 4. Well, no, that side is, but I think that the Deer Creek Park may also be. But it's people, one of which of those city councilors is someone who lives directly across from Deer Creek Park in Laurelwood, right? So they see all of the things, have a front row seat to what they see there. And I know that they supported that, and that's not a bad thing necessarily to support that. But one of the points I made is it's not going to take care of everyone. And it's a limited use of our commons in the sense that we sanction it, but people are living throughout Roseburg outside. They're living on our commons right now. And to have it in a more humane way seems to be a better discussion of public policy, but should have been discussed with the neighbors, the same issue with the for Grove, right? They spoke to who they wanted to speak to. My guess is with the city and the urban campground property, that they didn't want the not in my backyard, the NIMBY crowd there. They didn't want to give them a heads up, but they had to give public notice of something, and someone mentioned to me, well, they didn't even put, urban campground as the agenda item. They put the property, purchase of the property, and in some other way people got wind of it. And, and then it fuels a lot of things that I heard that were just, like I mentioned, I think yesterday at the presentation, is just the stuff that were just fears and not facts, right? And their perceptions of things and their beliefs about things. And, everybody can have your belief about something, but it doesn't mean that it's a good thing to base public policy on, right? But neither is letting the city, manager, whoever, not let the public know until 3 days before the meeting that they're planning on, putting, considering of course you would get that, reaction, and you should. But that's because, I think for Grove Park, this incidents, various other instances I know about where, well, my pet peeve, the garden, the garden on Rose, not, and that one I ended up getting an email saying, the guy saying, well, they didn't have to give public notice, right? It's like an administrative decision, right? And technically that may be true, but when you're in a community and people are using that and they see it as part of the community, it just seems bad form, even if it's not legally required, so we will see what happens. At this point, the mayor had mentioned during the discussion about the urban campground defeat, something about just leaving them at Deer Creek Park had been brought up before, and I'm thinking, well, maybe that's a good idea. Maybe they need to just put this infrastructure and support system where the people are anyway. And they're just literally every 2 weeks chasing them from Deer Creek Park. And I listened that someone told me today, Deer Creek Park across the bridge over Deer Creek, right? That little small bridge into the point, which is also city property. And then they wait, a few hours or a day, and then they go back to Deer Creek Park. And so that, what kind of stupid public policy is that? I mean, really, it seems insane. And then begging the question when we're talking about our common resources, how much are we paying for all that to happen instead of doing something better and trying to address
Yeah.
the fact that, on best estimates, there's 100 living outside, and it's probably closer to 200.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, you're right to use the word insane. And it's in my view, the insanity of putting the poorest people in our community through such an ordeal, to put it lightly, um, is it says more about the character of those who are passing the ordinances that punish our poorest neighbors. That's where the insanity really lies. Not just in the Kafkaesque uh, um, laws that drive people from place to place in a confused, hurried rush, uh, to the point where there's no way a person could even help themselves. But I think it really starts from the the demoralized character of many prominent people in this community. And it's to say that we have a city council filled with people, just like us who are not on city council, who are desocialized, who don't have a basic understanding of how a community functions. That for a community to even exist, to sustain a community for any extended period of time, healthily, certain principles have to be uh, normalized, have to be the very premise for community and unquestionable, such as a principle of an irreducible minimum, which anthropologists have recognized in the majority of human societies throughout known history, and is almost uniquely absent, or mostly absent in contemporary societies like ours. That irreducible minimum meaning no single person in a community is to uh, fall below a certain standard of living. That's to say, in a functioning community, the community on the whole, and through its social and political institutions, organized through its governing structures, no matter what they are, hierarchical, egalitarian, they ensure that every member of the community can keep their head above water. If somebody is hungry, they're provided food. If somebody has no shelter, they are provided a house, because an injury to one is an injury to everyone. And a sickness afflicting the poorest people in our community is really an affliction on the entire community. That's not to say that those people are, but that the poverty is the fact that a number of people have been allowed to fall into poverty and despair says more about the lack of not just their dignity being afforded to them, but lack of a dignity, decency, and responsibility to our fellow humans, to our neighbors, a lack of that in Douglas County. That's my speech of the night.
But you're right, because
She's having problems on Zoom there. I don't know. I'm speechless, Zach. I can't
Well,
I can't argue with you. So
well, it is tied, I think, to the question of running a community like a business.
yeah,
When we're talking about business these days, we're not talking about it, um, haggling and trading and a very basic market. We're referring to business in the capitalistic sense,
yeah.
as that is what business is today. Oh, I'm the host now.
He'll come back on, but
It is what business is in reference to today.
yeah.
And capitalism is not, it's not a moral system. And
No,
I don't mean that to say that capitalism is uh not not good or bad. That's not what I'm saying. It's that capitalism is a machine. It is a system. It does not operate according to morals. It is not an agent. It's not a being like you and I. It does not have a moral sense. It is a system that acts like any kind of automaton does, like a computer or some other kind of machine. They are amoral, and they are operating according to automatic processes that are programmed into it from the beginning. And so if we're saying we're operating like a business, we would be admitting that we are operating amorally, that we're not considering what is good or bad, what is just or unjust for how our communities are maintained and sustained. Those are not considered at all. And if we're not considering what is good for a community, what is just for a community, what is right for a community, then we don't have a community.
no, we don't.
All right. We're still streaming, but we've lost Betsy.
Yeah,
Uh,
I thought she might come back. I don't know.
well, we're approaching the time when I need to leave, and if I'm the host, then it's just going to be you.
You are okay. All right.
I'm going to make a call then. I'm going to make an executive decision now that I'm host. And
Okay.
wrap up. John, do we have any announcements for this upcoming week?
Well, we have that Zoom meeting on Thursday, so I was going to talk about something, but Betsy's not here. I mentioned this on October the 11th. The Friends of Douglas County are having their annual meeting, and Ellen, their land use group, and Ellen Porter, who's on the city council for Roseburg, she's going to be the speaker. She also is on the Oregon Land Conservation. She's a Southern Oregon representative of the Oregon Land Conservation and Development Commission, LCDC. So, and they fight for the preservation of the agricultural land. So, anyway, anybody want? It's at 12:30 p.m. at the Looking Glass Grange. It's a interesting group, and you can find out a lot about. Uh, uh, Here she is. She's back.
I'm back. I don't know what happened, and I just had the people out here yesterday. Changed my router. It just kicked off again.
You win
Geez,
again, technology.
I know.
Anyway,
So,
I was telling Zach that the Friends of Douglas County and the Land Conservation Group is having their annual meeting Saturday the 11th 12:30 p.m. at the Looking Glass Grange. And the speaker is going to be, in fact, her husband's on the board of this Friends of Douglas County, Ellen Porter for the Roseburg City Council. She's also Southern Oregon representative of the Oregon Land and Conservation Development Commission. So anybody is interested, it's a pretty good group. And I was going to mention too, I think I said this before, Shelley Weatherall is the president of the group, and her father was Ray Adorner, and despite her Republican background, she doesn't hold a lot of Republican views, and it would be interesting to have her on here sometime to talk about some of the land use policies that our commissioners have been trying to get through. They haven't had a lot of luck. Some of it is thanks to what Shelley is doing. So it'd be interesting to have her on here sometime to tell us some of her stories, because a lot of their actions leave her very, very befuddled. So,
Well, and Ellen Porter is actually the person who lives in Laurelwood who actually
yeah,
ran for city council. And Ellen was a lawyer for a long time. I don't know if she still is for Roseburg Forest Products, but she was not anti-homeless. I mean, she wanted them to have a place to be, just not across the river from her.
right.
Um, and given the kind of uncontrolled stuff that happens there, I mean, I can understand all residents' complaints of that. But yeah, I'm into having anybody come talk about anything if they are willing.
Yeah,
Um,
we'll
so I
talk to
think
her.
that's a great idea.
Yeah, I'll talk to her about it. She really knows a lot about land use, and there's a lot of legalese in it, so it's not easy to understand for the average person, because they like to throw a lot of legal terms around. But she's really good at cutting to the basics about it. So yeah, I'll mention it to her.
Yeah. Well, some of the basis of the community environmental defense legal defense fund is about that land use stuff, right?
Yeah,
And the big impact of preemption
yeah,
on the right of citizens to actually do something in their community in certain matters. um and I think that is part of that big picture. So even maybe the experts from them can one day come on and kind of talk about that more. Is Kai still, Kai's the executive director of the um,
sort of. Yes, he is.
yeah, yeah. And I have heard him talk a couple times on the whole preemption issue, and I think that, that's one, as how are citizens going to control? Because I think the one thing that people still feel very uncomfortable about from yesterday's presentation is what rights do they have under the current system, right?
Right.
How do these systems work? And I think that's really just an education piece. I've done some of that stuff, but I know there's, Donna, I can't remember her last name, up in the Portland area, who used to run civics for adults, but she took a hiatus at the beginning of this year. But she was a librarian, and I love librarians. They know a whole lot more than anybody else. Just ask a librarian. And far underrated. We give lawyers way too much credit, and it should all go. It should go to the librarians. But she used to do a series of presentations. Actually, came down here in person once, I think, for the League of Women Voters, and talked about those fundamental things about how people access, like I had mentioned yesterday, the public notice. What I didn't say is the law, provides for public notice about things like cutting the park, right? And when the public has a right to know about something. But there are rules about it, right? They don't have to tell them about it, like with the city council, right? There's no law, that requires them to notify them about that decision. And they have to deliberate and decide in public under the public meetings law, but nothing else
Right.
is mandated, right? So that's where the flaw in that system, it becomes on who is in office, right? Because it doesn't mean they can't notify the public. It means they don't have to, and therefore they don't. And even sending out agendas, the law says at least 24 hours notice. Well, and they literally believe that that means only 24 hours notice every time. So, unless there's a hearing, right, then there are other laws regarding, that. But we do have a way to do it, but dang, it's time consuming. That's the other thing. I think we as citizens, the reality is it becomes very time consuming. You probably spent a whole lot of your life on the parks thing once you got involved in it.
Right.
I spent a whole lot of my life. I even started a nonprofit
Right.
over homelessness. Okay. It does take, that much time when we don't have to do it. So the answer is maybe getting rid of those elected officials who don't have different, perspective, that or who do have a different perspective, um, and voting them in because they, it's never I never usually don't see something that says, well, the county commission can only give 10 days notice. No, it might say it has to give 10 days notice, but that doesn't preclude them from doing the right thing,
No.
no matter how much they want to. But and the fact is they want to. So that's where our battle is.
Mhm.
So everyone knows the election case between Todd Vaughn and what's his name, Loomis, is still pending, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
They had to have, the outside judge come in who did order Loomis to hand over some documents, but I think I read something this week that said it may be moot because a hearing may dismiss the whole claim. Um, so
Well, Vaughn has nothing. I don't need to be involved in the case to understand that much.
yeah,
Vaughn is part of a targeted movement that is specifically moving into the legal system in this way to disrupt, to
yeah,
slow down processes, and to sow seeds of doubt
yeah,
in local government. Um, Not that there aren't things to doubt in local government,
right.
but in this case, the voting system itself being called into question is way out there. And most importantly, it is a propaganda tool. This particular case has indeed elevated the inclinations among increasing numbers of Oregonians to reject the vote by mail system.
Right.
Not because they have any evidence, but because they find this um, distaste for uh, government that operates in ways that they don't like, even if it's what the majority of the voters have elected for. That is reason enough for them to say this is a fraud.
Yeah, and the to me the interesting thing about the vote by mail is there was a significant majority of people in Douglas County who voted for it, and that kind of if it's usually something that passes like that, you don't see that big vote. The other thing was also campaign finance reform. That number sticks in my head. I think it was 68% of the voters in Douglas County voted for campaign finance reform,
Yeah.
and I think that it's a big issue, except the people who are fomenting this kind of anti mail-in ballots are doing a whole lot of it. You see it on social media, even like next door. I see it constantly being, talked about, and blowing up stories about what's happening on every step of this case, right? That they're putting out there, oh, the judge said, oh, they have to release the records. Well, that's not an epiphany, okay? That kind of stuff happens in discovery all the time, in litigation. So it's not like there was a win. It is just kind of, the way things run in any kind of litigation. So, that, and then you keep in mind, if talking about our commons, the waste of money that this case is, because we, the taxpayer, have to pay for defending Loomis, in the county, and what happened on that election. So the other thing is, I mentioned at Winchester Dam, there was a decision by a judge that they say was appointed or by Trump regarding Winchester Dam, a federal judge, dismissed,
Right.
said the coho salmon were not injured, although in listening to the brief part of the presentation that the League of Women Voters, Jim McCarthy, I think, is the Water Watch guy that
Yeah.
did it. You know, that the judge acknowledged all the claims they were making were accurate, that Water Watch was making in those groups about what happened and the problem with the dam, but basically concluded none of them proved the coho. And I did see an article from the newsletter. I don't know if it's mentioned in McCarthy's thing because I wasn't able to watch the whole thing yet, is that they're actually appealing that decision to the
Yeah.
Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. So hopefully that'll get more sense because it is the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. But wouldn't it be fun if Winchester Dam loses and then they want to appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court?
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, they have the money probably. That group, they probably do.
Yeah.
Of course, they've got these other cases coming up too. So
right.
yeah,
And they have what my mother used to say, more money than sense. It's a
yeah,
saying of her era, that they must, because the millions of dollars that are on the line for those homeowners.
yeah,
It is like, and it is just crazy. We made an effort to try to educate them about, they could dump those people on the board making those decisions, but they didn't have anyone run against the incumbents who are all the ones responsible for these decisions.
yeah.
Um, but so I think it would be good to have somebody from Water Watch or one of the groups come and talk here and get to
Well,
the
Kurt Blaine, he's with the Native Fish Society. I think he still lives around here. I haven't been in touch with him in a while. He did a presentation for us a couple of years ago. In fact, I thought his presentation was better than the guy from Water Watch. But uh, I you know I can see if he's uh, if he's still around,
yeah.
or Jim. But I found it was easier to get hold of Kurt than it was Jim. So
Well, it would be good to have anyone, I think,
yeah,
because in the discussion of the commons, I mean, this is this is it.
yeah,
I
it
mean,
is.
that these
Yeah,
people are hoarding our commons right now, right? To
yeah,
have their private ski lake, no matter how much they want to, characterize it, that's what it is. I mean,
yeah,
bottom line, they have basically locked up our river, and our fish, right? Or
yeah, yeah. That's
want to look
true.
at it that way, for their narcissistic, entertainment.
Yeah,
And so and and the ensuing exercise, they're also using the common resources of their neighbors who are going to be footing the bill, particularly because I think that $127 million lawsuit is still pending. They're
yeah,
challenging that.
yeah.
Just one of those, I would think, would bankrupt some of those people on the river. So that's an exercise in what the commons really is about and who's
Oh yeah,
accountable, which is their board of directors, by the way, for really who caused the problem. Is there anything else? Um, that anybody wants to talk about? And I just want to mention that next Sunday, Chuck Willer's going to join
Good.
us, and he's going to give us his uh, what he has found out so far in all the diligent research he's been doing about Wall Street Forest. And that's the whole. This is one of these things about who's controlling our public lands, right? And for what purpose? And used to be people would claim it was these small logging companies or local logging companies, but that composition has changed dramatically,
Yeah,
with these Wall Street um companies coming in, these investment, what do they call it, timber investment trust or something like
yeah,
that,
yeah.
that come
And
in.
and land, and land management trust too. Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah. They got it all scammed out. I would like to maybe question Chuck about uh, Congress doing away with the O&C funding for the counties. How is that going to figure in even more? I like to get. I like to ask him about that too, because that's a that's another factor of that that is just going to be disappearing too. So
Uh, Recently, Jefferson Public Radio at SAU published an article specifically on that. I still have yet to review it, but I'm happy to go over it and uh, talk, bring something to talk about for next time.
All right, that'd be good. um well, because, and you're talking about getting rid of the payments they're making
yeah,
under what was
yeah,
formerly the
yeah,
ONC lands. Yeah. Yeah. And like under the rural schools
Yep.
stuff. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, that would be good. Because again, this is a use of our common resources. How's it being spent? I think pretty much everything we talk about fits with under that category.
yeah.
Anything else?
What's on the agenda for next week? What can folks expect next episode?
That'll be Chuck Willer with his Wall Street Forest presentation. He said that would, he could do it in about 30 minutes, and then have Q&A. And he's been, spending the last probably 12 months or so actually doing more research. We had him here a couple of years ago when he had released, or the Oregon Coast Range Association, he's been the executive director there, I think 20 some years, release, initially called Building Wealth in Rural Oregon. And it started to look at this, who owns timber here now, right? Because most of these, let's be real, they still are timber dependent, right? And Douglas County seems to be the one place that won't give it up, right? Really, this mentality in our county commissioners is, hang on to them for until our last dying breath, I guess. So uh, so that's what we're going to talk about then, and anything else anybody wants to bring up, and particularly like the rural schools, because at some point we're having a county commission race right in May, and that's where
Yeah.
it's going to be won if history proves anything. And the three incumbents have already, filed paperwork that says they're running again.
Oh, they
And
have.
so, yes, yes.
Oh,
And the only other,
I'm not
yeah, all
surprised.
three of them.
I'm
Yeah.
not surprised.
Well, yeah, my guess is but then given all the things that have been revealed by the budget, right? What is that, this is a good time to point some of these things out and find, and hopefully we have some candidates willing to run that to have a chance of, even pushing them into a runoff. So,
That'd be nice. That'd
yeah.
be nice.
Uh, yeah. And maybe some of the issues that we're talking about will convince people that there's really a time for a change for what's happening at the county level. And then we have city elections next November, not this November, a year from now, when city councils, and because that's really in our current system the best way to have a more say so, notwithstanding the stuff that Zach has brought up about community council rights, or
Yeah.
citizen stuff, which is important no matter who gets elected. I believe if we can engage people, get them to realize how important that is to their own lives.
Yep.
All right. So see you next week.
Okay,
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
okay, good night.